Yeah,
it's
so
not
this
like
podcast as often as y'all.
so this is the green room. So we're not. This isn't. This is the episode before the episode.
but,
This is
but
the
not the episode before the episode, which we
No.
just were in.
Right.
Yeah, because Kurt remembered to change it from 128 to 129. So that's good.
It's not
that's,
automatic.
Okay, that's very
It's not
important. Yes.
automatic,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and
Sometimes
there
I need
is
a reminder.
And there is a tip off that we're going to the episode when Kurt remembers that one button to push
Roll intro.
that rolls the intro.
Yeah.
If he remembers to roll the outro, we've really had a good episode.
Right.
So
100%. It's like a video game. I've completed all stages.
Yes, he
We'll
beat the
see.
boss.
The
He beat the final boss. Yes.
there is, if you guys want, there is a chat thing, a private chat in the lower left. Or at least that's my lower left. I don't know. Hopefully
Yeah, it's
near
online.
Yeah, in case I ramble, or maybe Jamie rambles, and we want to wrap it
and
up.
Sterling's like,
I
I'm
gotta
done.
go. It's dinner time, or
It's
bedtime,
past dinner
whichever.
here, yeah.
Yeah. So, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
So this is live on YouTube and Twitch at the same time.
Okay.
We don't currently get a lot of attendees, but it is an experiment that Jamie and I are doing. And is the background music too loud?
It was very dramatic there for a moment.
All right, yeah. It's the little.
It almost reminded me of, you remember that one Mission Impossible theme that U2 made, but it was all instrumental. And that was the best one.
I don't remember.
No.
Well, who was the Bond? That's the one.
No,
Help.
Mission Impossible, not.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's how close I am.
Yeah. Okay. There's a thing called movies, Kurt.
I did just watch Interstellar.
Yeah, I
I know
know.
it's almost 10 years old.
So that's actually where I was going. I was going to Christopher Nolan and his sound mixing.
Yeah. Yes.
Because his sound mixing is brutal.
Yes, it is. Oh my God. Yeah.
Is it brutal, good or bad?
Yeah, if you ever watch Tenet, which I recommend fast forwarding, it's just bad. I saw it in the movie theater, which pissed me off. But then a friend of mine saw it on HBO. She's like, I don't understand anything. I'm like, yeah, that's not you.
Yeah.
Well, I like Nolan. I didn't.
Oh yeah. I mean, but he's.
Yeah, and I love Interstellar. Yeah.
My wife
Interstellar's
was
really
actually
good.
the only reason we watched it is my wife somehow stumbled across their soundtrack for that movie, and Hans Zimmer did the soundtrack.
Okay.
And she just liked the music in the soundtrack, and so then we watched
Zimmer's
the movie.
great.
So it was a lot. I didn't realize it was 3 hours long, but then I should have known because it's Christopher Nolan.
Yeah.
That,
Right.
everything he does is 3 hours long.
It's meant to be 3 hours long on a screen that only 5 theaters can get.
Right.
Oh, is that what
Yes.
the Oppenheimer thing is, or
Yes.
any movie he does? Because I've heard, there's
He's
all
very
this.
protector.
Have you
Yeah.
seen Oppenheimer?
Not yet.
Anybody? No.
No.
It's not. It's to do, but I mean, it's in a theater, so I mean, that's something we haven't really done since.
Yeah, what I do like is, he
Pandemic.
really has, it's one of those things, he really wants the experience to be in the movie theater, which I give it's that's a dying art form.
Right. Yeah, it really is. I mean, I think, and what's funny is all the press about it and Barbie has been about both of them, going toe to toe in hopes of saving the movie experience. And,
It's a last gasp.
Yeah.
I thought
I
I thought it was about, all the talk was about people trying to go see them both in the same day.
well, yeah, there's that too.
And
they're gonna start trying to they're gonna try starting creating other ones, but I think eventually what's gonna happen, it's gonna be much more independent theaters, and maybe one chain that's left, kind of similar to Blockbuster or something like that. Like, there are things that definitely need to be in the movie theater, but there's not many actors who do that anymore. Like, Tom Cruise isn't going to live forever.
Yeah. Well, you know, here in Flint, we have the Flint Institute of Arts, which is in our cultural center. So we have a lot of museums, and the art museum has a movie theater inside with nice big cushy chairs, and they have a film series every year that you can buy. You know, it's like $100, and I get like 36 tickets that my wife and I will split. You know, and they have a movie every week for, you know, starting in October all the way into the following spring or May, you know, time. And sometimes they get stuff that's more notable, but usually it's very independent film or foreign film or something like that. And that's what we'll do. I mean, it's also like very close to my house, and so we'll do that. And I mean, we're not going to go. I mean, no offense to the Marvel.
Go together?
Oh yeah. I mean, I say split, but yeah.
Well, I didn't know if like it was like you take a date, she takes a date.
Yes, it's very liberal that way.
It's 2023. You never know anymore.
I mean, the movie theaters is dying. You know.
But you know, that's actually how I got into like film. Was NC State has a film series, and so me and my friends would go to the theater and they'd have foreign and independent films, and like that's actually like I didn't really watch a lot of movies before that, and I was a huge reading buff. You know, before architecture school was like, yeah, you can't do that anymore. And so like film, like it, you know, it's just like, oh, I've got 2 or 3 hours right now, like, and so like I have a huge love for film now because of that.
You know, it's funny. Before I'll just insert this humble brag. Jamie's already heard this story, but since we were already talking about Christopher Nolan, you know, I went to USC in Los Angeles, and so architecture school is a 5-year degree, which gives you like the super senior status for registration. And so Leonard Maltin, the film critic, runs this film class at USC that usually only athletes and super seniors get into, because once it fills up, and it fills up instantaneously. So as a 5th-year architecture student, I got into the film class, and it meets once a week on Thursday night, and all you do is watch movies. And the midterm is 10 questions, which 5 of which are like, what's your first name? What's your last name? What day of the week is it? Because
they gotta get you on that field.
They check. Well, they check your ID, and all he really wants is like people to show up, because it's so exclusive, this class. So as long as you show up and you take it's not about the midterm or the final, but the fun part, the main reason I bring it up is that one week, we watched Christopher Nolan's short film that came out before Memento, and I don't even know how many people ever watched that, but it was a black and white film that sort of had the seed of what Memento became. But the part I didn't tell you about is that Leonard Maltin typically would usually invite the director, producer, or an actor to the class and do Q&A. So we got to do Q&A with with Christopher Nolan back in 2003. And I mean it's a huge class, so it's not like very one-on-one, but it's in a theater. But I mean, it was fun. That's really cool. He was a fun guest. Actors, not fun guests. They're just boring. They don't have any.
Well, they need a script, right? Is that what you're saying? They need a script?
Yeah, there's no.
Did I go there? Yeah, I went there.
I'm gonna be, yeah. No, that's fine. They do need a script. They were boring. They were terrible.
Unless they're, a method actor,
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
And so like in the hierarchy of the guests, it was actors, producers, and the director. So if they got the director, which happened a few times, they were the most interesting people to listen to, because they actually,
Mhm.
I think as an architect, there was this relationship of understanding like the big picture, the vision, sort of orchestrating the entire affair of the movie,
Mhm.
and I think there's a parallel to architecture in that regard. So
Yeah, there really
anyway,
is.
so sorry to brag, but that
No,
Oh
was,
no,
I
I
love these weird
appreciate it.
anecdotes. Yeah.
you know, that, and the thing is though, like as a 5th-year architecture student, that class put me at 18 credit hours, which was maxed, max semester. But I didn't want to not take the class. Like I could have taken 14 credits because it's an elective. I didn't need that class,
Right.
and it went till like 11 o'clock on Thursday night, which
You were up
Thursday,
Oh
anyways.
yeah, because you were watching films.
Yeah.
and Thursday night was like the big party night on campus. But everyone, so we would literally like disperse from the movie theater, and then everybody was, drinking and partying, and then I was going to studio the other direction.
So with that, are you ready, Sterling? Are you ready for this episode?
I'm as ready as I'm as ready as I was about an hour ago.
Okay, that sounds
Okay.
good.
I hope
I'll
that
take that in the affirmative.
I hope that wasn't a subtle dig at like, I thought this was gonna be quick.
Oh no, it wasn't a dig. I was just
He's just like,
I find that I'm better at winging it.
Yeah.
All right,
He's like,
we should.
prep.
So now is the real live,
All right.
the live, which is starting. Look how young I was. Hey, Jimmy. How you doing?
We both were younger then. Yes. So,
I'll let you, Jamie. I'll let you introduce our special guest.
well, I will say that yes, we do have a special guest that we were hoping to get on a little earlier this summer, but I got to hang out with Sterling in Austin, and we were going to do kind of a fun first for the podcast where both of us were going to be here in the studio and sort of trying to pull this off. Didn't work out, but he's back again, and we're happy to have him. So this is a very old friend of mine. I'm very excited to have him on the podcast. Kurt has also spent some time with him as well. So Sterling, why don't you introduce yourself very briefly for our audience?
I'm good to know photography finally got on the map here. I went to. I am a literal old friend of Jamie's. We went to school together at A&M back in the 90s, and we knew each other through organizations and AIS, and that Langford Hotel shirt. I don't know how that shirt's got to be at least a quarter century old. Like I've outworn all my shirts, like it's all holes, and I'm like twice my double like body size. So I'm very impressed that you were able to kind of just fit that on. And after all these years, it might be a sleeve for me. So
yeah, this was the year that Sterling was the chapter president, and had the brilliant idea of wanting to have some a little bit more provocative designs for architecture shirts instead of just the normal like, hey, we went to college here kind of thing. So yeah, this has a gas mask on the back. So it's like
that's right.
This is the very beginning of the Fallout studio.
Yes.
So
yes. Yeah, I remember. I do remember. I forgot who drew that one.
me.
Did you draw that one? I'm sorry. It's been forever.
What makes it provocative? Is it the Langford Hotel part, or the gas mask, or the whole thing?
It was just,
I remember the gas mask was a little controversial, wasn't it?
The gas mask. No one was really super excited about the gas mask. I had done it as a photography project in the summer, like real photography. So that's another reason, like Jamie's
I
brain,
forgot about all of it.
Jamie's brain making all these connections. It's like sterling photography, like Jamie in a wet
It
lab.
sold really well.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Like these were went like hotcakes. I mean, there was.
Yeah, the shirts were the shirts. I mean, they definitely flew off the shelf. So like that's how we knew each other because like I was like, so this is the weird thing. I don't know like how they wrote me into this whole president thing or whatever, but like I'm a complete introvert, and like that school is gigantic. Like it's over like the whole college. I think is over 1,000 students, and like our AAS was like the largest chapter in the nation. It was like 250 or 300 at that time.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm the type of person like I like these kind of one-on-one conversations that we're having, and so like I'm having to do like all sorts of stuff I'm completely uncomfortable with. But yeah, so that's how I started. I'm originally from New Jersey. I went down to A&M. I had a full ride, and I was like, I'm gonna go down to like College Station because why wouldn't I go there? Um, and yeah,
ride.
it was a really good time. Wound up going to grad school at NC State. Practiced architecture for about 10 years, and while I was practicing architecture, I picked up photography. I similar to Jamie, I took it when I was an undergrad when it was film, but never really did anything with it. And then when I was in grad school, I got really sick. Actually, I had to drop out of grad school twice. And so during the times that I was sick, I still had access to the design schools. So I would pick up like the small digital 2 megapixel camera that we had and kind of go out and shot. And so I started integrating that like in my architectural studies. And my professor was like, "Oh, this is pretty good. They're like your designs are okay, but your photos are much better." And so as I was practicing, I was very fortunate. I worked for a small firm, and I worked in multiple states, and so I got to do a little bit of everything from business development and marketing, website design, to architectural design and construction and site management, kind of doing a little bit of everything. So during all my travels, I had a camera, little just small camera that I kind of shot during my travels, joined some photo clubs, and just started entering shows. I started winning them. Kind of at the same time, my boss was like, "Hey, you want to shoot pictures for our firm?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'd like to stay employed." So he bought a camera. Was like, "Learn how to use this." It was a digital SR, like 5 or 6 megapixel. So I started, I mean, they weren't great or anything like that, but I started shooting buildings, and then so kind of just one thing led to the next, and I'm kind of doing a little bit on the side, and then the economy goes kaput in 2008, 2009. And ironically, I was still one of the few people that still had a job. They pretty much let everybody go except for me and someone else. And and I was kind of doing work as a contractor. It's May 2009, and I'm in this studio. It's a nice day outside. It's an empty office, and I'm like, I had wanted to be an architect since I was like 10. And for the first time in my life, I was like, what am I doing here? So I quit.
That's the story I want. Like, that's the underline.
Yeah.
Because I've known.
First time in my life I ever felt that way. I was just like, you know what, during that time, photography had become like a real passion. It was very unintentional. I wasn't quite sure I was going to be an architectural photographer, but I was like, I want to do photography. Like, if I don't find out if I can do this now, I mean, I was in my mid 30s at that point. Like, when am I going to? This was a kind of a prime opportunity to do that. Like, architecture is going to be there if I failed at it. Unfortunately, I haven't. And so 14 years later, I'm still doing it and kind of traveling throughout the South. I live between Raleigh, North Carolina and San Antonio, Texas. And so this thing went way farther than I anticipated.
That's a great synopsis. You're really good at that. I need to practice my summary.
Well, that's the thing. I don't practice. The more I practice, I just learned. So part of that I learned actually while I was with the AS because I was always getting nervous in front of speeches and I would stammer. And what I learned as I got older was like, you already know what you're talking about, and everybody else doesn't really know, right? So who cares?
I like that. I like that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the thing about, that story too, Sterling, is just, and I've heard you kind of summarize it, a couple different ways, but it's, yeah, you were one of the, I mean, you knew me in design school, in undergrad, and I was one of those people that was like clearly a designer, clearly artistic, creative, but I was never convinced that I was going to become an architect. Like I was, that was not sort of, you know, I knew people in our program that, definitely, they wanted to be an architect. They were really working hard to be an architect. They were trying to figure out all the different aspects of it, kind of, trying to soak it all in. And you were that person who was just like, I want to be an architect, and it was very, very evident to me that you were going to become an architect. And then when you told me in 2009, you think I'm crazy? And I was like, you know what? I'd seen some of your other stuff. Yeah, I mean, I'd seen some of your other stuff, and I knew you were doing the photography for the firm and then for yourself. But it was like, I was like, you know what? And I was sort of where I was sitting, I was sort of the same thing. The firm is like, you're looking around, a lot of empty chairs, you still have a job. And, and I'm like, no, you know what? There's sometimes there's a time to jump, and you jumped, and it's been wonderful to watch. I mean, because and to hear how you've developed this business and still stayed you the whole time. I mean, that's the whole part that I love about it.
Yeah, I mean, that was really important to me. I mean, in architecture, it's really kind of easy to lose your soul. And I've kind of been through that, especially like when I was in grad school. I had a lot of struggles just personally and emotionally. I went through like, just creative kind of stumbling blocks during that time. And photography was kind of a way for me to kind of dig out of that. And so, I don't think I could become the photographer that I am now if I didn't go. I don't think I could have done it when I was younger, not to the extent like, I know more of who I am when I started this than I did when I was in architecture, right? So I think that's a huge difference.
Well, and I think it may be akin to Kurt, when you and I have talked to others and just amongst ourselves about that. It's the maturing aspect, and not maturing like an age thing. It's not an ageist kind of thing. Like you can't do it when you're young or something like that. But it's that it's, everybody's on their own trajectory, and some of them are super fast and some of them are slower. But as long as you're sort of, and you can feel it, like as a designer or as a creative, forget even designer, just as a creative, and you're like, I am much better now than I was 5 years ago. And it's not that the work is totally different, but it's, you almost feel like you're more connection with it, and
I feel like I know what architecture school is about now more than I did when I was a student, which sucks because like, it does, because I didn't know what the hell I was doing when I was a student.
Yeah.
And, when I go back, I've got, friends who are, in higher ed, and, I go back and they're like, hey, come do a critique or whatever. It's interesting because you see these kids, some of these kids, it's kind of similar. Some of them have like a huge direction, and then I see some of them and I'm like, that's the look that was on my face. I was absolutely totally lost. And like, it's weird as an adult because I remember I was doing, it was a portfolio critique, and I was talking to this kid. It was just a desk critique. And I was just like, okay, so what is it? Like, why do you want to do this? And he was just stuck. Like, I was like, and then I was just like, well, why are you here? And like, he got stuck. I was like, look, I'm not trying to trip you up, but like, this is what people want to know. Like this, like if you don't know who you are, like you're not going to be able to tell anybody. And like that's what, when people are looking to hire, they want to, like, everybody can do all these sections and drawings, and like that's not unique. Like people want to know who you are as an individual. And I didn't learn that till probably my late 20s, when it was really like I was out of school.
Yeah, I feel like my experience I was in a 5-year program, so it went all the way through to a professional degree. Unlike, well, I think A&M is does it do a 5? No, it's a 4,
It's
like a 4
it's
plus
maybe
2.
it's a 4+2, but they're sort of switching some stuff around now. Yeah.
Okay. So I think so in my case, so you have like 5 full years where you're like you start in studios from year 1 and you're like you're deep in it like the whole time. But I definitely was it didn't all click, I would say, until probably halfway through 4th year when I'm like, "Oh, I think I have an idea on how this sort of works." Like we did, you do a housing semester, so you do little bits of apartments and stuff like that, and then you do like a museum or a library. You do these variety of different project types, and so you kind of like figure out how to sort of assemble these things, and then the 4th and 5th years are these sort of comprehensive experiences. So you try and integrate a little bit more um, complexity, like systems, things like that. And some of it's I wouldn't say I was like, oh, I'm an architect now. Although when you graduate, you're like, oh, you're hiring me. Well, I want to be the designer, because that's what they teach you in school is to how to design things. And you come out and you're like, oh, I have to draw bathrooms for, and staircases and blah blah blah. But no, some of it started to click, I think, in my 4th year, and then which then helped me sort of do something a little more strategic in my 5th year, and then I I don't know, it, I think like Jamie mentioned before, the maturing part is, I'm still on that path, right, to
Yeah,
sort of
it's a perpetual one. Yeah.
seasoning this whole thing. And I recently went off on my own in 2021, sort of spawned out of the pandemic. And I've learned a lot more about the business side of things on top of just producing drawings to get permits and things like that. Um, but the
See
and
now,
then and I
Kurt.
also
See now,
teach
Kurt.
too.
See, Kurt. Now you need to like take a cue from Sterling and set up your satellite office in Texas. So you can
There you go.
have the Flint office and then the Texas office too. So
I could be in the cloud, like just a cloud
But
office.
that is one of the things, like with architecture education. I mean, kind of similar to public education that I wish we had a little bit more because it teaches, like, one of the thing I love about design school, it teaches you like critical thinking and like how to think. But I don't think it takes into consideration all the different diversity of ways of how we think, right? Like it took me a long time. So I'll give you an example. So I'm a chess player. So I played chess in high school and college. And so one of the things that infuriated me about, or I infuriated my chess teachers in high school was you go on a clock. I would never take enough time to think. I didn't have the patience for it, right? It's a long game. It's a 60-minute game. And I was like, well, I'm done thinking. I was very similar, like as a test taker, like the answer is C. Like, why am I waiting to do all this, right? And so when I went to A&M, I was on the chess team and I played quick chess. And I was so much better than many of my opponents, right? Because I was able to kind of think in that way, right? So with architecture, I think one of the struggles that I had is architecture is such a long process, right? Like you're going through all of this, and it gives me maybe a little bit too much time to think. And so, like with photography, like I mean, everybody always thinks it's magic, but like it's the process. There's pre-visualization, and especially with architectural photography, it's a design process. But that process is shorter, and then I go to the next one, right? It turns out I'm much better at that, right? And so, like, I think sometimes it's a matter of kind of pairing like how you think with kind of really where you really kind of fit in.
I think the to add to that or ping pong off of that is the it's a little bit of intuition, what I would call intuition. So you knowing that your chess game, your moves can be made in a quick fashion is sort of, I think, built out of an internal intuition, knowing that the
Mm-hmm.
moves are there. And then and I'm teaching now too, as well as practice. And a lot of my students, and not to their fault, but they kind of go, oh, I've finished, like, here's the design, and it's like Monday, right? And there's still 3 more days in the week to 3 more classes to get to Friday, to the next studio crit, and trying to. So yeah, it is a lot more drawn out, and this sort of like what we tend to call the iterative process, not necessarily the best part about, or the best definition of the iterative process, but
But along those lines of the iterative, though, is that there's still, I mean, to kind of pull you guys together, it is iterative. There is a speed and a pace to it that is individualized, and sort of understanding that about yourself is the key, right? And so, like, just like what Sterling's describing is exactly, I think any student in a design school is like, how do I fit in? What is all this stuff? And then how do I work? And that's the thing is, if you don't focus on that third one at any point in your trajectory and only start doing it once you're out, then you do have these kind of moments of being completely lost. And I think that intuition and about the process, about yourself, the iterative aspect, kind of leads us to the moment now that you're teaching in, Kurt, where you're seeing these students who, get to a solution, right? Some moment is it that Instagrammable moment, right? It's like, there's my image and I'm done. Like, I've snapped the picture of it. And I think that immediacy of that kind of capture and like, what do I need to do next? It's like, it's complete, is something that, is something is sort of plaguing, I think creatives and design schools. I think it is a bit of a generational thing. I mean, from a photography point of view, I'm curious, as you're seeing it now, and, what other thoughts do you have about that?
Yeah, so I listened to some of your recent podcasts about that iterative process because it's come up a lot in your discussions. I'm kind of maybe similar and a little divergent in some ways. So I'm similar in that, like, I think another thing, like, and I don't know if it's the fault of us in architecture, we always present this final product. Like and if any of my clients are watching this, I totally apologize. But one of the things that drives me crazy is when they have this rendering and they're like, we want to have a picture of this rendering, right? And so the intent is to show the client, hey, we're able to do this or whatever. But what it doesn't ignore, like, it's just like, but that rendering was done at the end of SD. Maybe it was done sometime during DD, right? There's a whole value engineering process. Like, there's a whole architecture, there's a whole design process that's been done that's not being shown. And so everybody has the impression that this rendering is the final product, right? So I just volunteered for a weekend with the Nome Project Line camp here in North Carolina. And you see it even in the kids, right? Because when the kids are going up for presenting, they don't think about presenting the stuff that was in between. Mm-hmm. They think about presenting the stuff at the end. Mm-hmm. And the end, one of the things I love about photography is, like, once it's the end, like, I just go back to another process. Like, I don't care about the end. Like, that's the thing that, like, with me, with my patience and the way that I think, like, I like to be able to go from process to process to process. If I were to go back to architecture, I'd kill it. Because, like, I know what I'm doing now. I know how I work. Whereas before, like, I just had to repeat. And I didn't, it was just such a longer process. And so, like, I get to do that with photography. I get to understand it in a way, and in a way that I just didn't fully appreciate before, sort of thing. Like, ironically, it's made me more excited about architecture than I was when I was in it.
Well, and along those lines, you've talked to me a little bit about sort of that dialogue that you have with clients, and so I think in your own experience, aside from being, somebody who went to architecture school, and now being a photographer for architects, in the body of work that you do, you're also dealing with those architects in a very sort of different dialogue. I mean, how?
It is.
Yeah, I mean, can you talk a little bit about that as another creative in that process? I think because that speaks to that rendering thing, as well.
There is it's a little bit easier and more difficult at the same time. It's easier in the fact that if I tell them, hey, because like some, similar to your clients, everybody's across the board. There are some people who have not gone through this process before. There's others where it's like, this is not my first rodeo. I've been with a lot of different photographers, right? Sort of thing. And so on one end, it's just like, well, we just want you to do your magic and, do what you see, which is complete. It's the equivalent of saying, hey, we want you to do a 2,000 square foot house on this flat piece of land. Go at it. Essentially. And then on the other side, there's, especially when you're dealing like with a top 100, 200 firm, a lot of them have marketing arms and, maybe, and some of them are a little bit more intentional. Like some of them, they're thinking about representation during the entire process. So they have kind of careful control of renderings throughout the whole process. They don't necessarily, especially like if they already have kind of a kit of parts that they're working with, they don't necessarily deviate from that template. So a lot of times I just had to shoot in Charlotte where I'm just looking at the rendering, I'm looking at like, okay, all right, cool. Well, like this is it, sort of thing. Yeah. You just kind of set up the shot.
Yeah.
And so, but everybody else is kind of in the middle. And so like my role is basically to kind of figure out, okay, where they sit and then kind of ping pong off of that. Right. And so there's a very kind of intuitive nature in dealing with that. A lot of time, for example, like one of the things I always try to understand, which I think gives me an advantage as having a previous career in design, is like I always want to know the essence of what it is that they have wanted to accomplish with whatever the structure is. It doesn't matter if it's a park, doesn't matter if it's a museum, doesn't matter if it's a gas station. Like there's always some sort of movement or motion or moment that is in all of these things. And so my task is to translate that, not necessarily just in a way that impresses other architects, but to the general public. Like I think that's very important. Like, it's important for the general public to look at a picture in a way that it may not necessarily be as impressive to other architects. Like I think it's important for the general public to look at like, oh, so that's why. I think that's, maybe it's not necessarily implicitly part of my job, but I make it part of it.
Right. It's like evoking a response. It's something that's visceral from the viewer. And do you think that comes also because you have that artistic side to your work as well, that you're bringing some of that to the way that
I think honestly a lot of it is also the reason I got into architecture. Like, it's the same reason, like, some architects want to create sculptures. Like I wanted to create something different. Like I got into architecture because like if I had to do everything completely over, I would just go into economics. Like, I didn't realize
you and I have had that. You and I have had that discussion about.
I was not expecting
you
to say economics.
Service industry. Like we know how to do it. We know what to do, but we don't have the capital to do it.
Well,
right? You don't have to,
I think I don't want to interrupt you, but I think kind of what you were saying with, and then as Jamie followed up was, as now a business owner myself and a member of the Entree Architect community, which is sort of for small firm architects, I've learned a lot of things that we are great at talking to ourselves, right, as architects in studio, in school, and in practice at AIA functions, things like that. But I think what you were getting at with the way you were under no matter what the building type, right, a gas station or a high profile building, if you can match the intention of the design to the place, and capture that image, then it will speak more closely to a client or user of that architecture, and better, right? So have a stronger connection to say the occupant of the building than to the architect or another architect, right? Because it has this
Yes.
relationship to who's the client, right? And who is the actual beneficiary of this piece of art or building. And the photo, so then the photo appears either in marketing material on your website or someone else's website. But if somebody
Mhm.
stumbles across it, it's speaking to the person that wants to buy more of that architecture, not necessarily
Correct.
other architects, I guess is my point.
Right.
Right. So
And that
knowing
was
the audience.
something and that was something that I probably didn't endear myself to my fellow students, especially when I was an undergrad, because I didn't hang out with y'all once studio was out. I hung out because so my rationale back then was architects are not going to be my clients. So when I go to the business school, I'm going to talk to them up. I'm going to talk to the landscape architecture and construction programs. I did that a lot. I talked to everybody almost like outside of architecture. And then like fast forward, like you are actually in my clients. And so what do I know? Sort of thing. But like I've always took in like outside influence. Like even when I was practicing architecture, like I studied like photographers and painter, like and writers. Like I've always just been interested in the I don't know, the ordinary, the everyday sort of thing, because that's what we deal with.
Hmm. I really like that. It's just very interesting. I would say I would in comparison, I guess most of my most of my time was spent looking at architecture, either in and Jamie and I talk about this a lot, like going to the architecture library and just pulling out books and looking at the, reading plans and things like that, and studying, I guess, about architecture, or trying to absorb. And then I did probably spend uh probably a lot more time with my fellow architecture students. Definitely more, it sounds like more than you. I mean, I love that premise of like you're like, yeah, I mean that's a lot of foresight, for a young person. So, uh,
Well, and
college.
it's interesting too because I think it's Sterling started to talk about the economics and sort of it's you know I think it's when you get to a certain point in your life and you're kind of like I've got all these skills. I see all these sort of structural things that I could have affected in a different way if I had the means. If I had the connections, the capital, the other connections that I could have developed, even knowing who you are now with the skills that sort of are in some of this creativity and intuitions that's innate. There's stuff that's trained. We're trained to do some stuff, but there's also some innate stuff. And I know that you're sort of hinting at some of that, Sterling, and I love it. And maybe that's when we bring you back for another podcast, and we can really dive into that because I think the amount of work that you've seen in your role as an architectural photographer,
Mm.
sort of separate from the process, and then also just the states that you've traveled through, and now having a business in two different states, you know, um, you know, coming from Jersey, and down to Texas. I mean, it's all these different things that you have a good perspective of all these different things that you've seen, and I think it gives um, an interesting tale about development. For architects and as designers, but because you're just slightly removed from it because of the career path that you have now. But you're still engaged with it because either these are still the people that you either went to school with or are engaged with professionally, and are mentoring now, like you talked about the students. And can you talk a little bit about that? You were telling Kurt and I ahead of time, I was asking you about your new speaking engagement, this fall that I'm excited about because it brings you back to Austin. But can you talk a little bit about how that developed and sort of kind of,
Yeah, so I, kind of, when I was a student, I was very engaged with AIS and with kind of a lot of social issues, whether involved architectural school, the profession of architecture, race, gender, all of those things. I was pretty vocal, probably to the annoyance of many people. And once I got into grad school, it's just like, I gotta work. Like, and so I just didn't do anything for a while. And also, I wasn't as successful as I thought I was going to be. And so there's just kind of a long time period where I didn't do any of that. And so now that I have reached kind of a certain modicum of success, I was like, all right, you know what? I'm almost 50. I'm in a position where I can actually like start talking and people are like, well, you're just saying something because of whatever. Like, I don't want to have that as something that people are gonna start, launching at me. And so I started joining organizations. I joined NOMA a couple years ago. And so, I talked with the national office. I was like, okay, so first of all, I'm in 2 states. Can I split between 2 different chapters? And they're like, yeah, we hadn't thought about that, but cool, sort of thing. And so I split between the North Carolina and then the South Texas chapter as well. And so the way that this design talk series by the Austin Architectural Foundation, I think this year, from what I understand, like they've basically tag team with another organization for every month. And so then the month of November, they tag team with NOMA. And so the NOMA chapter basically, and the weird thing is I've only, I think, interacted with them a couple times. I've been at a meeting, and then also we had an event with students at UTSA where they would just kind of talk to us. So and of course, I'm traveling all the time. So their interaction compared to like North Carolina, where I've been here for 25 years, has been actually pretty limited. And so, through LinkedIn, a couple of people that I had met, they kind of said, "Hey, would you be interested in this design talk series?" And I was like, "Me?" Like, and so, I'm not one to say no. So I said yes. And so, I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to talk about. I know it's about, a half hour, 40 minutes. I'll probably figure out a couple weeks beforehand, but, from what I understand, it's kind of talking about like who you are, kind of talk about like a little bit about your process, maybe give some, samples and things like that. I'm not exactly quite sure how that's going to manifest itself quite yet, especially since I do have a shorter process, right? And so
right.
it's going to be a matter of like, what lane do I really like want to talk about? What projects do I really want to talk about? Yeah.
Well, I thought about it as, when you sort of, teased the announcement, to some friends, and you and I have been talking about this sort of, talking in different audiences and kind of getting the activist side of us. I've always referred to it, as myself as the shit disturber, and I've had, it's kind of one of the best, compliments, when, one of your former professors refers to you that way. Thanks, Rodney. But, it's, with for you, it's with love as well, because it's like, I know that, the things that you're talking about have a completely different perspective than mine, and then when you described it to me that you felt like you were at a point in your career that you could do these things, and you were being really deliberate and intentional about it, but at the same time had reservations about how far do you go, and you're sort of bouncing some of that, back off of me and other friends, and I think that's, I think what it made me think of, honestly, with this new speech, was when I got both of you to speak on the same stage in front of the biggest IMAX in Texas, with the premise that it was, how can I get 10 people who, similar to what you're describing, don't typically get asked to talk to an audience of their peers or to an architecture audience in that kind of a way, where they're talking deliberately about themselves, their process, the things that matter to them, the issues of the day. And I think that, I think that event in Galveston in 2019 for the Texas Society of Architects was, something that they probably didn't even expect. But at the same time was probably one of the best Pechacuchas they've ever had. And not because I curated it, because I think you actually had 10 unique voices that were on that stage that all deserved to be there and all had really, really great stories. They only delivered them in 8 minutes, so the fact that you've got 45 or whatever now, I mean, man, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, this is luxurious in comparison.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm happy to be in these spots now, and these are the spots that I always wanted to be in, because again, not many of us kind of get these privileges, and so it's one of those things, use it, you lose it, and if anything, I wanted to be better for whoever kind of comes after me, and so once I built, got to a certain spot, no, am I where I want to be? No, but I'm to a spot where I can talk and do certain things, and even things like just on the job that I wouldn't have necessarily done before. And this happened, I think I told you this story before, but this was maybe about 4 or 5 years ago on a project, and it was a subsidized project that I was going to do an architectural shoot for, and they happened to include me on this email chain. And they're like, hey, so for this one, we want to have a diverse group of people, as scale figures, in this project. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, I can't. Why are y'all putting me in this position? I gotta say something now. And so I emailed. I was like, look, the first thing I did was let me see who's on this email chain, before I say anything. So I looked at everybody, I'm like, okay, well. Everybody's away. All right. Well, okay, guys. So look, I said, as someone who has shot a lot of your projects, there's been, I forgot exactly how I phrased it, but I was like, there's a lot of white people in your projects. And if you start doing this now in a project that's subsidized, that is one hell of a statement. The whole email chain just comes to a screeching halt. Just stops. And then the president of the company emails me back a few hours later. It was it was a lot of emails flying across. I was surprised they included me. And they're like, yeah, you're right. But I was just I'm kind of in a position where I kind of have to say something if I see something, even if it means I lose the work or if I lose the client. And that's not necessarily something I don't think I would have done or could have done. I guess I could have, but I'm not sure if I would have done that in my 20s.
Right. Well, and I think that even that, that story, you actually care, I mean, you care about it on, so many different levels, right? And you're caring to even just to tell them, it's, that's, that says a lot, and especially in a role that you have as a sole proprietor. I mean, it's, these are clients. So that intersection of those two things, those two worlds is, it doesn't certainly come easy for anybody. I mean,
no.
In that terms, because that's not even advocacy. That's just living your life. That's you. I'm in a room, and they're having, it's that email chain could have been you sitting around the conference table with them all.
I think that's the hardest thing about working with architects is that everybody cares. It's a physical hurt sort of thing. It's a physical love, care, pain for everybody involved, right? Sort of thing. And so every day you're kind of walking this tightrope with everybody because every day I'm working on something. It was a little bit different with clients because, I don't know if you're working with a house or a business or whatever, there's a certain detachment that you can have at a certain point, right? But it's a one-to-one thing with y'all. And so I love it and I care about it and you love it. And so it's it multiplies against each other. And it's a very kind of intense sort of thing.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Well,
So
I think too. I mean, for Sterling at least, though, in that situation, you're kind of you're not a employee of the firm doing the photography for the project, so you kind of have a little bit of a separation from
Yes.
and it probably helped too that you've did photography work for other projects for the same client, so you had this sort of portfolio of imagery that yeah,
There's
is
been
going
a
to
certain faith
stand
that's
out.
been built up over the years, sort of thing. And again, if I had been a year in, I might not have said anything, sort of thing. I mean, that's just being real about it.
Oh
But
yeah.
I'm in a position now where, and that's part of why I'm saying things now out loud, because it's not that I can afford to lose the clients or whatever. It's not like I'm just discarding it, but like I'm willing not to work with people. Like I'm cool.
mhm.
I
Yeah.
don't need it all. Like if this
Mhm.
if me saying this is gonna somehow, negatively impact me financially, then so be it. And I'm in a position that I can do that
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the better move. But we could, I mean, that could, that could definitely go on into a path.
now.
Like, I mean, because I think Jamie is giving me the eyes of like,
No,
let's go
I was going
talk
to
about
say that
this.
it was I was going to say we skipped one thing that sort of we're only
It's in
like
our name
yeah, like it's
as
in the
part of the
name.
branding.
Yeah, it's part of the thing. So I was going to ask like Sterling, so what's the typical coffee, that you've been
So I really hate to disappoint y'all. I've actually listened to a couple of your recent podcasts. I am not a coffee drinker. I am one of yes, I am one of
you were
the
that
few. So
second guest now that's like
yes, I am that second guest. So congratulations. So the story behind coffee is I didn't like the taste when I was 18. So I got by on sugar. That's
ah
basically been my vice.
Uh,
Right. And so which I've had to kind of give up for the most part. But yeah, now I still occasionally I'll drink coffee. Like if I have to be exceptionally tired, I know I have like a 13 or 14 hour shoot sort of thing. But I am one of those aggravating people. If let's say even if I don't really do this, but like if I were to stay up all night, I will perk up at 6 o'clock in the morning automatically. I'm one of those aggravating people. And so I don't need the coffee in that regards.
the brain just kicks in and goes, dude,
Yeah.
it's 6.
up.
You've got stuff to do. Get going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's okay. We are not discriminate. We don't discriminate against people that don't drink coffee.
No,
Um,
but so
they become
so
our special guests.
this this was
I don't hate it. I actually enjoy it.
yeah, so this will still be coming your way.
I appreciate it.
Because I finally got mine, and there's a little hole in the back that Kurt likes to,
So what's on the front cover there?
So that
Ah.
is one of Jamie's sketches. So that's Carlo Scarpa, Castelvecchio, and the coffee is quite good.
Okay.
I will have to say. So
What kind of like what kind of coffee is it?
it's like it's from Rootless in Flint, Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hazelnut and milk chocolate, and the milk
Okay.
the milk chocolate really does come through quite nicely. So
All right. I'm looking forward to giving it a shot.
yeah, it's good. It's good. So
Well, see,
I appreciate it.
so you are. I mean, I think yeah. So we might not include Sterling in the same camp as Evelyn
yeah,
because he actually will drink coffee, and so it's just it's not a sort of regular
it's not a
occurrence.
ritual. It's not the
Right.
Yeah,
ritual that we have.
I'm not a connoisseur. It's not a ritual. If it was a ritual, I definitely would become a connoisseur because there's no way I would just be able to drink any coffee.
Right, exactly. Yeah, for sure. So along those lines, Kurt, are you just like bathing in this stuff now, or what's the deal?
No, I gave half of it to you, so
Oh,
like
okay.
my supply is greatly diminished. But no, I actually haven't had any yet because I'm still on the light bright
Um,
flavor from Rootless in Flint, which I didn't bring the bag today, but
did you
I
did
showed you
you
in the
did
last
you
one.
ever have one of those, Sterling? The light brights, like where you put the little pegs in?
The toy when you were a kid.
No,
You know what I'm
no, we
talking
had a
about.
lot of other different. I know what you're talking about. No, we didn't. Not that I can. Not
Wow.
that I can. Yeah, I don't
Yeah, so,
remember that at all.
so like no, like Kurt like shows me this bag. He's at the store and he's like, and it's Rootless's new like light bright. And I don't know if it's like a special one off or whatever. And I immediately in my like I was like 5 years old again, like with
Yeah,
the light bright, and I was like, that's the best toy ever. And all it
I
was,
remember there was when Star Wars came out. There was a light bright. I believe it was made by Light Bright. It was actually a Star Wars like what are they called?
The lightsaber? No.
Yeah, thank you. I was like sworn, and I didn't want to piss any of the Star Wars fans off that might be watching this because you know how that goes. Yeah, it was something that like you would rub. I think, and maybe I'm missing. It was you would rub it against a light, and then it would light up. I don't know if that's the same manufacturer or not, but I do remember the Light Bright toys.
yes.
Well, I should have brought the bag, but this new flavor, I don't think it's a special run. I think it's just a new flavor that they're doing. But they even found our coffee bag is black because we're architects, black and white.
Architectural black.
Yeah, the light bright bag is this nice iridescent blue, pink, purple material, which probably can't be recycled, but that's we can save that conversation for.
Yeah. Just don't tell Ilya. Yeah.
But it has a nice um, color way. One thing I don't know if Sterling probably doesn't know, but we talk about this. So Rootless is a Flint-based roaster, and we like to support our local roasters, and I've befriended these people, and they made this special coffee for us and the podcast. But the other thing they do is that every unique flavor that they have, they commission artists to draw or design a logo for each bag. And so there's in our case we came with our own artist in Jamie, but but so it's kind of nice. They're very kindred spirit in the process that they do too. So but yeah,
That's really cool. Yeah.
So along the lines of kindred spirits, let's get to the art.
The art. All right. So how do you want to? Well, I'll just turn it on, and then we can maybe.
You're the curator, buddy.
I'm the curator today. Well, I guess it is because it's my mural account, but yeah. Well, so the fun part of this today though is that Jamie had to dig in the crates a little bit for a couple of sketches, but only because Sterling's here and there's Jamie's done at least 2 sketches of 2 photographs from Sterling, and he already gave me permission to place these on my mural. So for all those copyright people out there, I'm conflict free. Oh, let me turn this off for a second here.
Conflict free photos, yes.
But we kind of we did this collaboratively, put these this grouping of photos together, but so the sketches above match to the photos below. They are in 2 different locations, right? And so one, like say, starting with the left side, we're kind of looking.
Kurt,
Yes.
Before you go on, I have to ask Sterling, just because we have a fellow architect and designer here, and friend, because but Sterling, did you like how Kurt had to like adjust those photos about 75 times?
and line them everything.
Yes.
What's it? What?
Center align.
Just teasing you, buddy. Just teasing you. You were just
my tweaking the.
Yeah.
2 inches off center.
But it was good. It was good. You
I don't
like had a
think it's
really great.
actually there.
It was a great voiceover, like while you did it. You kind of were like disguising the movement. You're like, don't look behind the curtain.
Well, we have two hands, right? One hand's on the mouse, right, and the other one's on the keyboard. I mean, these are the things we're taught, right? Well, all right. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm getting. Now I'm gonna slide this over. I'm self-conscious about these things now. Well, you'll have to remind me, but I do remember you said the pier on the right is in.
Yeah, so
Raleigh.
these are both in North Carolina.
Uh-huh.
So the pier on the right is on the outer, or was on the Outer Banks. It's called the Frisco Pier. It was basically obliterated by a hurricane. I don't remember how many years ago, but they tore it down at least. I want to say maybe right before the pandemic. So before they, they've been wanting to take this down for quite some time. So I've been meaning to get out there, and so most of the photos that you'll see of this are not like this. A lot of them are, some of them are astrophotography. So you'll see the Milky Way in the background as a long exposure. So I actually had this general idea that I was going to do something like that, but it was stormy. Because I don't get much time off, and so this was like right before spring. So I was like, all right, let me head out to the Outer Banks before it gets crowded and I've got some time on my hands. So it was actually really stormy, and so there's no stars to be seen. But it was just kind of this. I felt it really kind of matched the already kind of storm swept pier. And it was very first thing in the morning. So this was like right after sunrise. So the sun came out a little bit just to kind of get a hint of light and shadow on that pier with the backdrop of the clouds. And so I did. It was anywhere between a 30-second to 1 minute exposure to kind of soften off the waves, and then and so it becomes a little bit more painterly in that sort of sense, as opposed to just merely kind of photographic. So,
oh, that's cool. I didn't even think about the length of exposure as a I don't know, it just didn't cross my mind. In both cases, I suppose with the movement of water, you're going to have more activity, like on the image on the left.
right. So if I had
static.
snapped it like normal, you might see much more of the actual suds of the but it was one of those things. I used a neutral density exposure. I have what's called like a big stop, like it stops it like a lot. I don't remember exactly how many stops it stops down to. But I thought, when I was there, I was like, I felt like the scene really kind of called for that exposure. And like I also think that because of that, it kind of gives this inference to I guess passage of time as well.
I love the photo just because it has and I'm much more interested in black and white photography, always have been, just enamored by it. And I think maybe even more so, like you said, both of us took the same photography class in college. You clearly are using it way better than I've ever done, but I think that the color photography is something that similar to even kind of color and paint in my own art, is that I love it, but I'm always apprehensive about kind of delving into it. This particular piece that you had has that painterly quality. Do you find in your art, did you ever find a difference between black and white versus color in the way that you approach it?
Yes, well, everything's intentional, right? So last night I actually, so a lot of the photo clubs locally will kind of invite me to kind of critique their work and things like that. And one of the things I always kind of mention is really similar to the design process. Everything's intentional. Why did you make this form? Why did you do this? Like the use of color and the use of black and white is an ingredient kind of similar to that, right? So I will say the tendencies of why I use color is because I find the information, I was going to say the information informative, but that's what it is. So for example, there's a photo that I'm donating and it's a fall day, right? Like it's all these brilliant like red. It's a mill, and there's all these brilliant reds and yellows and orange. The color is important. You make that black and white, it is completely dreadful, right? Sort of thing. At the same time, color masks. Color can often mask, or at least not necessarily mask. I would say divert your attention from the purity of light and shadow and kind of gradation, right? So like when you're looking at the picture on the left, so that picture on the left is often done in color. I've seen it a lot, often done in HDR, like a very kind of similar view. And one of the things that I think was important for me when I worked in, I don't know, did you have Larson? Was he your professor for photography? So I had Larson. And so those like a lot of the things he taught I still kind of use, as far as there's meaning in the depths of the darkness, right? And there's meaning in those highlights, sort of thing. And for the left sort of picture, especially for something that, I mean, I don't know when this factory might have been active. I mean, it might have been like the early 1900s or whatever, up to like maybe the mid 1900s. But it was really kind of important to have these kind of deep, dark tones in this kind of metal structure. You don't necessarily need to see everything, sort of thing. And so I think a lot of times it's just what you're trying to convey, and I think it's very individual to the photo itself. When I'm taking photos, personally speaking, I'm never thinking this is going to be black or white or color. I'm just seeing and I'm just shooting.
Well,
right, as opposed to architectural photography, where I know exactly what this photo is going to look like when I'm taking it, sort of thing.
Well,
I don't really know until I sit down and I process. I'm like, what did I see today? I have no clue what I saw. And then so when I'm doing like my fine art photography, the process of development is a huge part of the actual thinking process. Whereas with architecture photography, I've already thought about all of that way ahead in advance. So I'm using kind of two different processes for me.
Yeah. So this is a dumb question. I think it's going to be dumb, but I mean, I assume you're using primarily. Well, I'm assuming often it would be a digital camera.
Yes, it's everything that I use is digital. But the principles of film photography. I mean the camera's the same, right? I think the equipment is different, and so I think one of the nice thing about being like in our age group is that we strap. And I'm sure you've had many of these conversations between like y'all picked up the pencil and now we're working with the computer. It's the same thing here, right? Like I'm still using a lot. Like again, like a lot of people, like if you're I don't know, if you're like 12 years old now, you may want to see every single little detail in that, right? You're gonna see like this is why they develop things like HDR, because they wanted to see every little highlight and they wanted to see every little shadow, right? And that's not I mean, you can if that's what works for it, but there's a real art to communicating these photographs. And so what is it that you're showing? What is it that you're not showing? Sort of thing. Like you can't just do it just to do it. And I think that's one of the things that I think in design school, if anything that kind of stuck with me is like, sometimes you just kind of throw things at the wall to see what sticks. But in the end, you're still making very kind of purposeful moves to a certain goal.
Yeah, I think what let's see if I can get this across in the right way. But like an example that I often struggle with is people want these ultra high def TVs or 4K, 5K, 8K, whatever, bunch of pixels, right? And so the technology exists to like create that stuff. But if you actually stood outside and just looked at what your eyes can view, I mean, our eyeballs can't pick up 4K or create a 4K image, right? There's fuzz. I mean, depending on, I wear contacts, so there's definitely some challenge to that. And so,
is this about you getting older, Kurt?
No. This is about kind of like nothing. Not everything has to be 4K.
No, you're right. Jamie and I, we've talked this, same comparison with music, like with MP3s. Like, I can literally hear every sound, and it's not as an enriching of an experience than when I listen on record or tape. Like, once it got CDs, it started to kind of cross over. But when you went from CDs to MP3s, there's just something about hearing every little thing that I don't know. It's just too much information, and that's one of the things that architecture school teaches, though. Like, it teaches about like what information that you're kind of conveying, and that goes into photography, that goes into renderings. Like, I think that's why sketching is important, right? Because like or just any traditional media outside of photography, because photography is unforgiving. You see everything, right? Or at least if you're shooting at a certain aperture, you can see everything. You kind of you can kind of choose what people see or don't see based on your crop or your depth of field. But when you're drawing or painting, you're choosing what's important, right? Like, you're looking at Jamie's photographs. He's choosing those shadows, right? And those are the things that he's picking up in the photograph, which I appreciate, because like that's intentional on my part. So I appreciate that he picks up on those shadows. Like, almost every line is in those shadows.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, I mean, I'm glad that we kind of came back to wanting to talk about this compare and contrast, because that particular sketch is one technique that I don't do a whole lot, but I did really deliberately because of your piece and what that black and white photography that you're showing in an artistic way is really talking about. How did you describe? I mean, what was the phrase that you used? Sort of the depths, the depths of the shadows. I mean, it was like,
like there's a certain richness to it.
Yeah.
Like there's, it's not just, there's a richness in the blacks.
Yeah,
and like we did that in photography class, like in those prints.
And it's that they are at the same time revealing of something that's maybe just out of reach of those eyeballs that Kurt is talking about, with that digital detail. But at the same time, it's sort of evocative of, I think in both, I'm particularly happy with it as a sketch because I think it conveys the same feeling that I get when I look at the photo. And that was, yeah.
And going back to kind of what Kurt was talking about, like, the eyeball, like we see everything, but like our brain processes what's important, right? And so, going back to the camera being unforgiving, like it picks up all sorts of stuff that like my eye doesn't necessarily like see. But like, in the development of it, like the way that I personally try to do my art, also my architecture photography as well, like I want to make it look like as you would have perceived it with your eye, which kind of gets into representation architecture photography again, right? Because like kind of like, hey, we want to make this look like the rendering. Well, then why do you have the rendering and why do you have the photograph if they're going to be the identical thing?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think well, I mean, there's a whole lot of like technical questions that, I mean, which could be probably boring, if I go into those things. But like, it's because
you ask me technical questions all the time about my sketches.
Yeah, you can ask whatever. Like, I'm happy to.
I'm curious. I love
great.
this stuff.
Well, I guess one would be, we're viewing this, it's kind of like screen grabs from your website to Mural to then Restream, where we're putting this all together. So there's all these layers of like sort of maybe bastardization or
Xeroxing.
Yeah, like sort of yeah, pixelation or resolution.
Yeah, Sterling, you and I definitely went to school together. Xeroxing, come on.
Which mimeogram.
Yes.
But so you mentioned, so for example, I would imagine, like, say for a client, architecture client, they're primarily going to use that for their website and maybe some print material that they would create for a client, a presentation or something like that. But then your fine art, you have well, that becomes up to you how you choose to. I mean, these are on your website, but then also if you exhibit them, then you
and
can
I think
choose to
I've
output it.
exhibited both of them. Yeah, I've exhibited both of these. The one in the bottom right has won a few awards. Yeah, so like when I was in architecture and I thought that's the path I was going to take, I thought I was just going to be a fine art photographer. I had no designs on like making this a real like living because like doing this on your personal time is a huge money suck.
I would imagine, yeah, with printing.
Well, and also
and
sort of
mounting
a little bit of
equipment.
an adrenaline junkie kind of thing with the one on the left too, because for those who can't see it, but we'll see it in the show notes and all that, on the podcast. The image on the left is this factory, this abandoned factory, and as many an architect or architecture student knows, we like to get into buildings and
urban spelunking.
Yeah, it's sort of the urban explorer, ruin, architecture, all that good stuff. So that this photo has a lot of those qualities, and I think that in kind of capturing it as a sketch was sort of almost feeling the same way about it. There's a trying to get, the blacks, the shadows, those depths of space to read almost like they have a little bit of energy to them, is also sort of the way I feel about, when I've been in a building like this. I haven't been in this building, but where you're kind of walking around and you're not really sure what's around the corner, or what you're going to find. And, in those vistas, like this one has a great, almost 1 point vantage, to the sketch as well as to the photo, in which are, do you find that as from a photography point of view, do you find the 1 point perspective harder to compose, like than where
as an architectural photographer, it can be, especially if things are not constructed in a way that it actually lines up, which is very common.
Now we're getting into the secret sauce. Yeah,
the actual built, because like it's one of those things where sometimes I almost wish they would just bring me in for CA so we can just, because I can't tell you how many times where I'm just like, yeah, that light's not on the right wood panel. Like it's one off. If you passed it, you're not going to notice it. But because I'm lining everything up with this other thing that you have, you have this reveal here and we place the furniture here. Now I can't necessarily shoot it like that. Now I have to shoot it 6 inches to the right to make it look like it's lined up, sort of thing. So that thing kind of drives me crazy because it takes me forever to line that stuff up.
Is it well, back to the technical questions though, is it ever been done that you Photoshop something into place?
Oh yeah. Like the difference between like in all these like personal photographs, all these have been processed in like 5 minutes. Like it's very, like I don't do a lot of editing. Like with architecture photography, it's like all sorts of, it's like marketing photography. Like there's so much that's just a bold lie. Like you just move this HVAC, remove this door,
power lines,
and then
probably, right?
everything's are just practical. Sometimes there's a crack, and you're like, well, that's not supposed to be there, or they
like
put something in the wrong. Just all the practical things of architecture that y'all have to deal with that drives you crazy. Like every single time, it almost happens every single shoot. I'm there, the architect's there, and we're setting up the shot, and it's just like, yeah, that's not installed the right way. And then either I have to talk them off the ledge because like it's not as bad as you think from a photograph standpoint, or like we have to like, yeah, you're right, man. We gotta come back and do this,
talk about
sort of thing. So it's a lot different.
Well, One or point a connection back to say like the lower left photo and the sketch on the left. Um, is that all like just something Jamie and I talk about a lot? Uh, mostly because a lot of Jamie's sketches kind of take on a sort of dystopian conceptual
Mhm.
perception, right? And so it's not necessarily always something of a real space. It's a imagined space, and they have this sort of dystopian, post-apocalyptic kind of feel. And so the sort of
I'm much
abandoned
more
building.
optimistic than you're painting me right now, but yes.
Oh no,
It kind of reminds
that's
me
not a
of like
bad thing.
sci-fi punk.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yes, and I'm not trying to make it sound like a downer or anything. But so because we've been talking about how much beauty there is in the image that or the photo that Sterling is taken with the richness of the shadows and the blacks, things like that. And so if captured or portrayed in a certain way, I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting, now that we've taken it from sketch all the way to photo and then, back to the sketch above, it's just interesting that I mean, these spaces exist, but then how do you, it, I'm trying not to use the word, like the ruin porn phrase that everybody
Well,
is probably coming.
that's actually what I was trying to avoid. Like, so one of the real backstory between like me and I used to do this as a kid. I mean, there weren't cameras back then or digital cameras back then. Like, it was just something like if there was a house that burned down, like I would go in 3 weeks later. Like, there was an empty apartment in a complex. I'd go like, yeah, sorry, mom, dad, if you're looking at this, like, yeah. But I was just I used to do that all the time, and so like I was always like an observer of like my environment, and that influenced me going into architecture. And we kind of talked about this in the green room, but like I was always interested not only in just the new stuff, but like also the dilapidation or the human destruction or just the vandalism of buildings. I loved seeing that sort of thing. And
Right.
like in architecture school and structures, most people, we have the book, Why Buildings Stand Up, right? Sort of thing. But there's a companion book, and it's called Why Buildings Fall Down. And I love that book as well, sort of thing. And so, the interesting thing about having these two different avenues of photography is like the architecture is the new stuff. It's kind of the birth, right? But like the thesis behind like my personal photography is like, so like, and I say this in my artist statement, like buildings are like I kind of almost in a sense humanize these structures. Like there's a real heart to them, and they're not permanent. They are born and they live and they die. And so like I capture them during like all phases of that, and that includes their death, sort of thing. And so capturing these, I always wanted to avoid the ruin porn and like there's a kind of a very stereotypical way to kind of present these buildings,
Hmm.
in ruin, and I really want to humanize them.
Hmm.
Well, and there's
Yeah,
just,
thanks.
and I think along those lines is that there's um, the humanizing of these buildings or these sort of places that you're kind of inhabiting. I think it's showing the beauty of them, as they are. And I haven't heard you talk about it that way, as as they have come this life cycle, but it really does make a lot of sense. And I think as a designer of buildings and spaces and places, hopefully we're thinking about those things. I like to maybe capture some of that in a sketchbook, but as a designer, I think it's important to kind of think about those. And I think they say that about photographers, anyways, is that they're, and artists in general, is that they're kind of capturing the reality of the world in which we live, either imagined or not. And I just, I just wanted to thank you again for just, sharing these images. I mean, it's not your architecture photography, but I mean, it's I think it's great to have them up against the sketches in a way where your work inspired the sketches, and I love it. So, and I'm glad.
That is really cool. I forgot about all these. I'm happy to see these again. Yeah.
Well, the I just forgot what I was going to say, but I think it's, I guess, like the idea of patina or aging, right? I mean, buildings do, they don't look like the rendering, as we've talked about a couple of times, right? A brick is going to have, the mortar joints and then little smudges and then things add to it, or patina overlay on top of that, and so on, and so the idea of aging. But yeah, as Jamie said, I don't want to repeat too much, but yeah, there's this. It was eye opening to me to kind of understand your perspective on you know how you see or create this human condition onto these architectural structures, and so. But yeah, so is this the ending, Jamie? Is this what
I
are you giving me the end that I was asking for?
I think this is, Kurt, as Sterling, we joke about on many an episode, maybe too many an episode, but Kurt just doesn't like to leave the party. He's just, he's one of those, he is never going to do an Irish goodbye. Like never. Like Kurt, that's just not going to happen. So, but
it's like, don't you remember when we were in Galveston and we closed that one bar?
Oh yeah, the three of us. Yeah, it was like,
yeah,
like there was no leaving. Like the bartender's like staring at us, going, "You guys gonna just keep hanging out?" Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, this was fun, guys. Hopefully it was halfway informative.
Oh, this was great.
No, it was great. I would love to have you back, because there's so many other things that we didn't even talk about, like AI, but we won't even crack that can.
Yeah, like I said, I can talk about anything and everything as evidenced by this podcast. So anytime, guys.